All right, the New England Patriots are well into their offseason right now, but they're not certain how much they're going to actually need because we don't know right now, Evan Lazar, whether or not they're going to need to replace coaches, a coach, multiple, or even personnel people because you have Patriots interviewing all over the place, being rumored a lot of different jobs, and we'll kind of just run down what we know. We know that
Yeah.
their top personnel guy, de facto GM, next to Bill Belichick, Dave Ziegler. Is a name that's out there. I think the Raiders' interest is the one that seems to be the most realistic there. And then tied to Ziegler, out there in Vegas, Josh McDaniels' name came up as a hot uh, you know,
Dark
potential
horse.
candidate,
Yeah.
dark horse candidate. I'm not
Yeah.
fully buying that. I'll tell you why. But what we do know is Jerod Mayo is a legit candidate. I think he's the
Yeah.
first person to get a second in person interview. And that's where he is right now. So he's legit and he's real and he might be one of the top candidates there. It potentially could be Joyling Ziegler. So let's get through all of this right now. Which of these losses, if they do lose any of these guys, would be the most difficult for them to overcome?
Yeah. I'm going to point to Dave Ziegler
I
as
agree.
probably the hardest one because from what I've understood about the last two draft classes, Dave Ziegler has had a huge hand in both of them and has really been somebody that is willing to stand up a little bit to Bill Belichick in the draft room and say, hey, look, our scouts did their homework on these guys. We went to all of the pro days. We went to the Senior Bowl. We were up close with all these guys. I understand that you turned on the tape and you called up Nick Saban or you called up your coaching buddies and you said this and you said that. But we have a really good formula that we're going off of right now. And we truly feel like this player is going to be an impact player for the Patriots. And last draft, 2 drafts ago, Belichick got his guy in Kyle Duggar. I'm 100% certain that that was a Belichick pick. He went
Yeah.
down to the Senior Bowl. He loved Kyle Duggar down there in Mobile, and he picked him. But last draft, they draft two guys straight from Alabama and then two straight guys from Oklahoma. Name brands, kind of A-listers, big time players on big time programs. And I do think that there was a different direction with the draft, even in that second draft with Ziegler, with Duggar and Josh Uche and some of the other players they took in that draft. And I think the biggest emphasis outside of Mac Jones, who was obviously the cookie cutter system fit quarterback, take the quarterback out of it. The rest of the draft picks that they made, they got athletes, right? They got explosive players. They got guys that were good testers that could move, that could make good explosive plays. Barmore, Duggar, Uche, Ramondre Stevenson. These guys were not your N'Keal Harris, Sony Michelle, Isaiah Wynn, these guys that didn't check all the boxes from a physical profile. And that refocus to saying we still need to care a lot about, we can't draft the 6'2" left tackle. Like that guy can't happen here anymore. We can't draft the wide receiver that runs in the low 4.5s because it doesn't translate to this game and to this level anymore. So the fact that they've re-emphasized that, I think, has been really massive for their draft in general. But I will say that the dichotomy, as I wrote about today, and the conundrum that they have with Jerod Mayo and Steve Belichick on the defensive staff, I was told it wasn't necessarily something that the players felt was like a reason why they lost in the wild card round to Buffalo or why the team came apart at the end. But moving forward, that situation and that conundrum
Yeah.
is a very awkward formula for them going forward.
Let's set the stage here. There is a vibe, and again, I know Evan Lazar, writing about it, reporting on CLNS media. There's something going on there. It feels like
Yeah.
Mayo's the guy who they're listening to all week long, or who's doing stuff. But Steve Belichick is calling the plays on Sunday. There might be some confusion as to who people are supposed to take direction from. I think you have a person like Mayo who's kind of like, am I the guy or am I not the guy? You
Right.
have he can't even get outright named the defensive coordinator, and he's been a hot head coaching candidate for 2 straight years. So again, you have to feel a bit marginalized if you're Mayo here. So it makes sense why he would want to leave, because he's not really getting his due. And of course, anybody's going to want to leave, but I mean, he's a legit hot name out there. Multiple people are super interested in him. And I think he was, interviewed for multiple jobs and is a very realistic candidate to land the Raiders gig right now.
Yes.
So now the question would be, I think If he doesn't get a gig, can these guys coexist? Mayo and Belichick into another year right now. Is that something you think is possible, or does one of them have to go?
I think it is possible because from what I've heard, there is no real tension or friction between the two guys where it's like a divide in the locker room. This is not Donovan McNabb and Terrell Owens, right? Where
Sure.
half the locker room is over here and half the locker room is over there. But the biggest problem that I've gathered in my reporting is that Jerod Mayo is and Ian Rappaport earlier today on NFL Network called him the de facto defensive coordinator for the Patriots. They're not
Right.
calling Steve Belichick the de facto defensive
Yeah,
coordinator.
Belichick gets more cutaways though.
Right. So Jerod Mayo is the guy that during the week is leading game plan meetings, is making presentations to the defense,
Right.
is the leader in the building outside of Bill Belichick on that side of the football. And for many reasons, and I think the biggest reason being that his relationship with the players, because of his obviously background as a player and his ability to motivate is on a different level than Steve Belichick. Like Steve Belichick, people that have heard him talk with us in the media, I mean, this is not a personable guy. This is not a guy that is exciting or that oozes
Dynamic, charismatic.
dynamic
Yeah.
orator type of guy, right? He just isn't. Jerod Mayo gets to the front of the room, and I think he commands eyeballs. I think he commands attention. I think he commands respect. And I think guys want to play for him. Guys are motivated by his presence and motivated by his words and what he's saying to them when he makes these presentations to the defense. So for me, Jerod Mayo is in a lot of ways the face of the defensive coaching staff, whereas maybe behind the scenes, it gets a little bit more divvied up between Steve, Matt Patricia, and obviously Bill Belichick as well. So the biggest fear that I see with the Patriots defensive staff, if Jerod Mayo were to leave, is that I think that would make an even larger role for a guy like Matt Patricia, where I think Patricia would become essentially a lot closer to his old role as the defensive coordinator than what he was this year, which was basically a confidant advisor, I guess quality control coach, if you want to call it that, who was in the room, made his inputs, made his sort of suggestions, but wasn't driving scheme, wasn't driving game plans. I think if a guy like Jerod Mayo leaves, and they're going to have to give more control stylistically to a guy like Matt Patricia, and you're going to have a staff that's basically run by Steve Belichick and Matt Patricia going into next season.
And how's that going to play?
Not great. I mean, look, I think that the biggest thing is nobody is perfect on this defensive staff, right? The defense didn't play well down the stretch, especially against Buffalo both times at the end of the year. So I think to paint Jerod Mayo as this perfect coach that and use the other guys as a scapegoat is a little bit unfair. Jerod Mayo had his hand in it as well, and Jerod Mayo had a huge hand in a lot of the things that they were doing from a defensive philosophy standpoint. But for what I was told, when the Patriots,
Like, say, the game plan on how to defend Josh Allen the last two
right,
times they faced them?
you gotta if you're gonna say that
You got to own that.
you
Right.
gotta take your share of the blame pie,
Right.
right? Like you can't just sit there and say, "Oh, well, that was all the Belichick."
Steve did the bad stuff. Right.
Right, exactly. So what I was told is after the Week 6 loss to Dallas, the Patriots went against Davis Mills and Dak Prescott, and their defense got shredded in both games. And I think Bill Belichick went into the defensive coaches, did some homework, did some reflecting, and said, "We need to do this, this, and this to turn the defense around this season, and make it happen." Right. I think is essentially the message that the head coach gave to those defensive
Right.
assistants. And the defensive assistants took it from there and said, okay, we're gonna, Bill says we gotta play more zone. Bill says we gotta unlock Barmore and Judon. We're gonna do this, we're gonna do that. Exactly like Bill told us to do, and they figured it out. Then what happened at the end of the year was they got stuck in that formula and they couldn't play another way. There was no other way for them to change it up. They were an early down zone team and a third down man team, and they were very, very predictable that is how they were going to play. And they could play that way against some teams, but unfortunately, against the good teams like Buffalo, they weren't able to man up in those third down situations, and they got shredded on third and fourth down against the Bills in both of those Week 16 and wild card matchups. So the Patriots defensive staff right now to me is awkward. It's not that there is this huge tension and everybody's fighting and everybody's, I'm taking my guys over here and you can have your guys over there. I just think that there's an awkward dynamic where Jerod Mayo was essentially the defensive coordinator during the week. Steve got to call the plays on Sundays, and there is no real leader to point to for the
Well,
players.
that's the downside there, where if direction, I understand the head coach is supposed to deliver direction top down, and everyone else is supposed to execute his plan or his vision.
Right.
But you like to think that people are bringing their own independent thoughts to the table. So if that's not really happening, is either one outside of taking Bill out of being able to look at the big picture? What is the value of a defensive coordinator who's just waiting to be told what to do?
Yeah, it's a totally fair question. I think on both sides of the ball right now, the Patriots have some real questions to answer about innovation. Are either one of those sides going to truly innovate from an
Right.
offensive or defensive perspective to adapt their schemes, update their schemes, make their schemes more NFL ready for 2021, right?
So
Is that ever going to happen on either side of the
and
football? It's a huge question moving forward.
let's flip it to McDaniels, because I would say from all the
Yeah,
post game shows we did, Evan, I would say after a loss, the
yeah,
number one target almost all the time would be got to get rid of McDaniels. What's McDaniels doing? Even after
yeah,
some wins, I think a lot of people are, as you mentioned, innovation, a little bit fed up with like, this is it. This is what we're doing. This
right,
either the insanely conservative approach some games, which we attributed in part to not putting Mac Jones as a rookie in a position
playing
to,
not to lose.
yeah, but the playing not to lose happened all year long. But the more, I get that if that was strategically what you thought was best for Mac in year one, given the circumstances, maybe okay, and maybe it completely changes if everyone comes back and you see Act Two next year with McDaniel still here as the OC
Right.
and the same group of people with Mac after a year under his belt. The innovation is the thing that worries me here. Is as the game continues to change, whether or not you have people who are changing along with it. And again, this is why I don't believe Josh McDaniels is a legitimate target other places. I think he's, there's new hotness out there and there's old and busted, and I do think that McDaniels is falling under the kind of old and busted, which is like people want the innovators, they
Right.
want the McVays, they want those guys coming in
Yeah.
uh, because they want someone who's ahead of the game, as Bill Belichick has been in so much of what he's done along, and maybe and McDaniels was for a very long time. I don't know if that's there anymore. And again, we don't know how much of it is a product of the personnel and how much of it's a product of times change, things change, people change, and maybe some people just get left behind.
Yeah, it's funny because once upon a time, Josh McDaniels was the Sean McVay,
Yeah,
was the Kyle Shanahan, and I point to the offense in 2007 as an example of that. Before 2007, before the 2007 Patriots, three wide receiver 11 personnel was not a base package in the NFL, right? Teams did not run 11 personnel regularly on offense. That was a third and long. We got to have a big pass play. Let's get more speed on the field. But everybody was running regular, which is, 21 or 12 or these heavier packages to run the football. And now we see so much 11 personnel across the league. And really, the Patriots with Wes Welker essentially invented the slot receiver
yeah,
position and
yeah.
said, like, this is a new position that we're going to play. We're going to treat it differently than the outside guys. It's going to be a smaller, quicker, more agile, more shifty player. And we're not going to care about size and if he can go up and win a jump ball or anything like that, because we're going to keep him in this
Yeah.
radius right here. And they invented a whole new position. Now I feel
The
like,
option route, the pivot route, just
right.
go out there and read and then react, and we'll get you
Yeah.
the ball. And,
Yeah.
because you're right in the middle of
Wasn't
the
going
field,
on.
we go
Wasn't
left,
a
go
ton of
right,
that. No.
just figure it out. None of that
Right.
was happening. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So that 2007 offense was really the birth of how we've gotten here offensively in
Right.
terms of what we see across the league. It really started with the Patriots in 2007. So I look at that offense and I say, okay, well, once upon a time he had those creative juices and he
Right.
had that ability to adapt to personnel and change things. But now I look at the Patriots offense now, and essentially it's the same offense and it's never changed, it's never evolved. And I look at players, and I won't necessarily point to N'Keal Harry because I think N'Keal Harry is his own thing and probably just wasn't a good evaluation from the scouting department.
Right.
But you look at guys like Jonnu Smith, you look at guys like Nelson Aguilar, who were productive in other places, who were playmakers in other places and
Yeah.
useful pieces. And the Patriots never seem to get a feel for how to exactly use those guys within this framework of the system. So there's two
Right.
things that are
They
going on
used
here.
to do the opposite. You bring in a
Right.
player like Welker who's being misused and say, I know exactly what to do. And I think that's what
Right.
everybody thought. That was what the hope was. They must know exactly what to do with Jonnu Smith.
Right.
He's going to be used in so many fun and creative ways. And oh my goodness, Aguilar, what if he's truly a number one and he's just barely scratched the surface? And it
Right.
went so far backwards that those guys were relegated to below replacement level players. That was the most stunning thing about this year, I'd say, the underutilization of those two assets.
Right. So I think there's two conversations here. One of the conversations is, do you just need to find players that fit the system better than what you did, right? And you just need to go out there and instead of drafting a guy that's like a N'Keal Harry in the draft, like a Treylon Burks, right? Instead, you go the other direction and you draft a Chris Olave because he is the smooth, silky route runner that can get open, or a Garrett Wilson who plays very well in the slot. Those are the types of guys that fit the mold better than what a N'Keal Harry or a Treylon Burks or one of these other big-bodied receivers would, because there's clearly a disconnect in this system with guys like Jonnu, with guys like N'Keal Harry, that we can see that those bigger receivers that aren't necessarily crafty at the top of the route, that don't create a ton of separation on their natural ability and need to be schemed into the plan. Those guys have not succeeded here. So you have two options. You can either go ahead and go all in on your type, right? And load up on your type to fit your system, or you change the system, right? And I think the Patriots, and maybe it's the right approach. I'm not going to sit here and say it's right or wrong, but Josh McDaniels runs Josh McDaniels' offense. Like, Josh McDaniels didn't barely change the offense for Cam Newton, let alone changing the offense for Mac Jones, right? So McDaniels runs his system. So therefore, when Bill Belichick's out there shopping for the groceries and McDaniels is giving his input and all this kind of stuff, the Patriots better be sure that they are getting guys that fit exactly the prototype of the types of players that succeed in the Patriots offense. Because I would love to see them innovate. I would love to see them update. I'd love to see them go spread, get lighter, faster everywhere, and go spread and run some more RPOs and run some more of these new age concepts on early downs. Try to take some vertical shots on first and second down. I would love to see them go that direction and be the Kansas City Chiefs or be the Buffalo Bills, but they won't. I really don't think they will. I think that they're still going to play their brand of football. So you just better go out there and max out the types of players that you get that can fit that sort of scheme.
That's what's going to have to happen. And again, as you said, two different conversations. So again,
Right.
just to kind of wrap it, not just from a standpoint of what he did with the existing group, but and whether or not the Patriots use a new voice. Well, I'll ask you: one, do you think they would benefit from a new voice? Which is to say, would it be altogether terrible if McDaniel's left? And
Right.
what would that do for Mac's development?
I think it would be terrible if McDaniels left, to be honest with you, because of two reasons. I think the
So
biggest
you think
one,
he's capable of doing it differently? He just hasn't been.
I think they're capable of getting better players to fit his system,
All
right?
right.
So I don't know if he's capable of doing it differently. I don't really think so. But I think that they're capable of getting better guys that fit their scheme. And I look at
Yeah, but we
positions like,
hate schemes, Evan. This is what bugs me is for years, teams would
yeah,
come in here and they would, oh, we run a 3-4, we play this. And that those
right,
teams were easy pickings for the Patriots. As you
right,
said on the defensive side of things, they became predictable when they were playing
yeah.
zone and early downs, man and third down. And so it's like, okay, so I know how to play these guys. Patriots should not be a team that people have a book on. And that's so bizarre because it's so backwards from what they've always been, which is we can change our style and game plan and design week to week because we got the smartest guys and we're out ahead of you and we're going to make you play left-handed. And
Okay,
instead, you're just
but
going to
let me
do the
rebuttal here for a
same.
second. let
Yeah.
me rebuttal here for a second.
Can I
Okay.
just rant a little bit?
Yes, you're allowed to rant a little bit, but I got to rebuttal here for a second. So the one thing that I would say to this is that, for example,
Yeah.
Jacoby Myers and Brandon Bolden were your slot receiver and your third down running back
Yeah.
last year.
No doubt.
You can do much better than that, right? Where your system is really dependent on those two positions, right? And really dependent on a slot receiver that not only has separation quickness and ability to get open over the middle of the field, but that can also take an 8-yard gain and turn it into a 30-yard gain, right? You need that player on your roster. And I think the Patriots can upgrade there. They can obviously upgrade a third down running back, and they can get better players
Yeah.
for those two positions. And maybe this offense
Yes.
will run better then.
So yeah, exactly. I mean, we talked about it during the course of the year. The Patriots literally have anti-yak on their team. They have guys who catch the ball and fall down. So again, it's really hard to have explosive plays when you're relying on the quarterback to throw the ball 30 plus yards downfield and then just the receiver catch it and fall down. They're not doing anything after the fact. So you need people who can. And again, there are Debo Samuels don't grow on trees, but I know everybody there, every time they see him or an AJ Brown or one of those guys do
Right.
something with the ball in their hands, they're like, so yes, of course, you need to upgrade that. So we don't know what's going to happen. A lot's going to shake out probably in the next week or so. What we do know is Ziegler is a hot name. Mayo
Yeah.
is in line, and we don't know what's going to happen there. Josh McDaniels, as far as we're concerned, I don't even know that a permission slip has been granted to interview him yet by any teams.
Not
So
officially. Yeah, these things sometimes these things tend to go by back channels, right? Because you don't want to put out there
yeah,
that this is your guy, so they don't necessarily announce it. But I want to circle back to the
yeah.
McDaniels thing real quick,
Okay.
though, and why I think it's best for the Patriots to hang on to McDaniels. And the number one thing is obviously Mac Jones. You don't want to start changing offensive coordinators on Mac every single
Right.
year. And I think the problem that you look at with the offensive coordinators in particular is, okay, let's say McDaniels leaves and the Patriots bring in Bill O'Brien to be his coordinator. Then Bill O'Brien has a good year as the Patriots OC, and then he gets hired to be a head coach somewhere. And then you're on Mac's third OC, right? And you just keep going through offensive coordinators, which is terrible for quarterback development. And that's the biggest thing I would point at. The other thing I would point at, the grass isn't always greener on the other side. Like,
Sure.
I don't know who would be the guy in waiting for the Patriots if they were to move on from McDaniels or McDaniels was to move on from them. But I could tell you right now that all the rumors were that Joe Judge was going to be the guy if he left to Indianapolis after 2018. Is that really who you want?
No, I mean, I know everyone's hot on O'Brien returning. You don't even know if that's possible, but I
Right.
think that would be a natural, easy fit, and you
Yeah.
wouldn't lose a lot there. And obviously, the familiarity. But you're right. Anything short of that, if you start going into, well, I'm Bill Belichick, I don't want to bring in a guy I don't really know, so I'll just kick it down to my wide receivers coach, and I'll
Right.
kind of run the offense. That's what you don't want. So,
Right. It just,
knowing
the grass
the
isn't
way
always
Bill
greener.
operates, he's not going out there and he's getting somebody he feels good about, that he can work with,
Right.
that he knows, or it's going to be kind of like, we'll just do it by committee, which is never a great idea.
And they're not going to change the system. They're not going to bring in a whole new guy to rewrite the entire playbook and
Yeah.
change who they are fundamentally. So it's going to be a Belichick guy. It's going to be somebody that's ran their scheme before, that knows how to run McDaniels in Charlie Weiss's playbook. And it's not going to be someone that's completely outside the box. They're not going over to Sean McVay and pulling Kevin O'Connell to come run the McVay scheme here.
Nothing too spicy. Yeah.
Right. It's going to be exactly the same. So if it's going to be exactly the same, you might as well have the devil you know instead of the devil you don't. That's
Fair
just
enough.
my opinion on it.
Fair enough. Again, we'll have a ton more Patriots content throughout the offseason, so make sure you follow Evan Lazar on Twitter, Patriots CLNS on Twitter as well. And most importantly, subscribe to our YouTube channel. We're going to be going live a ton, certainly during any breaking news situations, but obviously with our multiple Patriots podcasts and programming throughout the offseason, things really heat up. There's going to be a ton of draft coverage, free agency coverage as well, and we'll keep you updated throughout the NFL postseason as a new Super Bowl champion is crowned. But again, thanks for watching. For Evan Lazar, I'm John Zannis. Take care.